This is Jeff Lesher with What's the Point? It's hard to believe that only a week ago I recorded a video in which the premise was, if you tell a story, whether it's to others or yourself, over and over, even if it's not true, even if it's bad, it can have a lot of effect on you and those you tell the story to. And so you should be very thoughtful about the stories that you tell, how you tell them, and to whom you tell them. And then Wednesday happened, which was fundamentally the result of somebody, in this case the President of the United States, telling the same story over and over, a lie, based on rigged elections which weren't rigged, fraudulent votes which weren't fraudulent at all. I mean, there's no evidence of this, seriously. The statistic, the percentage of votes that are even in question is so insignificant, it's laughable that we have to have this conversation. But these lies continued, as did this idea that something had been taken from you. Somebody stole something from you, so you should go and violently get it back. And so the President of the United States, by telling these stories over and over to a group of people who heard them over and over and chose to believe them, decided to attempt the violent overthrow of the very government that they profess to love more than anybody else, which apparently gives them the right to murder Capitol Hill police officers and attempt to harm or kill the Vice President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, and any number of elected and other officials of government, because they hadn't been heard. But in reality, they had been heard. And they just got outvoiced, if you will, by the other side, so to speak, another candidate who was elected president in lieu of the candidate they preferred. So they wanted to, quote unquote, take their country back. It's my country too, by the way, and be heard, which they were through the process they just lost, and no longer participate in that process and seek to be heard in the legitimate way, but to follow the demagogic and irresponsible, at minimum, guidance of their president, who, by the way, said he would join them and then, of course, gutlessly did not, and other members of his entourage like Rudy Giuliani gutlessly talking about combat justice, somebody who's likely never been in a physical altercation in his life and certainly never faced enemy fire in combat of any sort, telling people to go break the law and really break faith with the country in which they reside, which, just lastly, was ludicrously represented in part by some members of these mobs carrying the battle flag of the Confederate States of America, which, just to review basic American history, was the group of states that chose to secede from the Union, to leave the United States of America, not be part of the United States of America, with the principal aim to continue to be able to enslave other human beings. Now, I was born in North Carolina. I grew up outside of Atlanta. I consider myself to be, relatively speaking, a person of the South. I was educated at a time when the Civil War was still sometimes referred to as the War of Northern Aggression. And I find it absolutely mind-boggling that any American patriot, or someone who considers him or herself to be one, would ever wave that flag as though it represented something positive about these United States. And so symbolically, that's important. This is what stories can drive us to do. But now we have the opportunity to write the next chapter of that story. And you're the author of that story. And you've got some choices to make, which include who you're going to align yourself with. And I would encourage you to take a cue from some leading corporations who have said that if you're on this list of lawmakers who chose to seek to obstruct, without constitutional authority to do this, by the way, the simple endorsement of the process of the Electoral College, all of which had certified, all of the electors which had certified the votes, and the states that they represented certified the votes. So that was done. They were just there to say, yep, 20 of those, 30 of those, we're good. There's no objection process enabled through the Constitution. That there were 140 some lawmakers who, after a violent mob sought to overthrow the government that they're elected to be, still voted in favor of this fiction, many claiming, I'm just trying to promote voter integrity and restore confidence, the very confidence that your lies eroded. So what's the story that you're going to tell moving forward? Are you going to side with these folks, or are you going to actively take a different path? And oh, by the way, in a societal context in which at least a significant number of people believe that the law doesn't apply to them, do you have a code within your organization? So forget society for a second. Just think about your company. Do you have a code that you expect people to abide by? And when they fail to honor that, do you help them develop to it? And if they are not willing or able to do that, do you help them find the exit from your organization of opportunity to some that fit better with their sensibility and their capability? Or do you allow somebody who essentially lays down in the cereal aisle at the grocery store and throws a tantrum because mom or dad won't buy them Apple Jacks or Lucky Charms, that they're not being heard or they're not getting their way, to then get their way? Now, the likelihood is in your organization, you're actually giving in to some of those tantrums. And I would just say, and this is not a ridiculous line to draw, dots to connect, that when you start going down that road, where you quickly end up is people trying to violently overthrow your organization because they're not getting their way at the time in the way that they want. These are choices that you're going to make, choices that you're making passively or actively that will determine who wants to work with you, who wants to do business with you. And if you ignore the context in which we're living and believe that that has no impact on what you're doing, and similarly, don't understand the opportunity that you have to make a difference in changing that conversation and the argument in society, because it is true that there are people who are hurting financially. There are people who are seeking opportunity that they can't seem to find. And they've chosen to channel their reaction to that in the direction of hatred and violence. But if they had a better job, how differently might they feel? And for those people who are far from the most extreme, but maybe leaning in that direction, we can still recover those members of our community with whom we already have relationships, in whose family they already are, and on down that list. But don't kid yourself. One thing absolutely has to do with another. And when we start making excuses and allowances for people who abjectly reject the process that results in something that doesn't suit their particular interests at this very moment, when we give into that, when we allow others to operate without honor, without code, we're going to end up in a whole world of hurt that's even worse than the calamity and the near tragedy that we saw unfold on Wednesday. And if you think that leadership doesn't matter, we got there because of an evil person who chose to use his powers for bad, was consistently not held accountable, and continued to do worse things, because why the heck not? So if you take all of that back into the entity of your organization, be different, be better, be actively so, starting now, because it really matters. And it is absolutely connected, and it is within your grasp to make a positive difference. And I urge you to do so starting now. That's the point.